My name is Elaine, and at 32 years old, I never expected to find my voice at the Thanksgiving table. Every year, I dreaded our family gathering, knowing my mother Diane would find new ways to remind me I never quite measured up. But this year was different. When she called me a mistake over pumpkin pie, and everyone laughed, something inside me finally broke free. The words that came out of my mouth changed our family forever. If you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength in difficult relationships. Growing up in suburban Michigan, our house looked picture perfect from the outside. Two-story colonial with green shutters, neatly trimmed lawn and flower beds that bloomed right on schedule. But inside those walls, my childhood was anything but idyllic. My mother Diane was the kind of parent who seemed warm and charming to neighbors and teachers, but behind closed doors, she wielded criticism like a surgeon wields a scalpel, precise and cutting. Elaine, stand up straight. No one likes a girl with slouched shoulders. Elaine, did you really think that outfit was appropriate? Elaine, an A-. What happened to the other points? These comments peppered my childhood's small cuts that accumulated over years. Meanwhile, my younger brother Kyle received a completely different upbringing under the same roof. 3 years, my junior Kyle was the golden child from the moment he was born. Look at Kyle already reading at 4 years old. Kyle is so natural at baseball, he gets that from my side of the family. Kyle just knows how to talk to people, such a charmer. My father Harold witnessed it all from behind his newspaper or later his laptop screen. A kind but conflict-avoidant man who worked as an accountant, Dad would occasionally throw me sympathetic glances or pat my shoulder after particularly harsh maternal criticisms, but he never directly intervened. Your mother just wants what is best for you, he would say privately. She has high expectations because she believes in you. But it never felt like belief. It felt like disappointment. Despite the emotional headwinds at home, I excelled academically. School became my refuge, a place where effort translated to measurable success. I graduated high school as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to University of Michigan, and graduated summa cum laude with a double major in marketing and psychology. My career trajectory continued upward after college. I moved to Chicago and worked my way up at a prestigious marketing firm, eventually becoming the youngest executive in company history at 30. I had my own downtown apartment, with a view of Lake Michigan, close friends who valued me, and even a recently adopted rescue dog named Baxter. By external measures, I had succeeded. But family gatherings still reduced me to that uncertain little girl desperate for approval that never came. It was only in the past year that I had begun seeing a therapist, Dr. Winters, who helped me understand the dynamics at play. Words like narcissistic tendencies and golden child syndrome gave framework to my experiences. Our weekly sessions had slowly rebuilt my sense of self-worth and established healthier boundaries in most areas of my life, except with my family of origin. Family systems are often the last frontier in boundary work, Dr. Winters had explained in our session just before Thanksgiving. Those patterns were established when you were most vulnerable and have had the longest to set in. When the annual Thanksgiving invitation came, my first instinct was to decline. I had a legitimate excuse, a company retreat in Colorado that had been rescheduled. But after talking it through in therapy, I made the decision to attend armed with new awareness and boundaries. You get to decide how much power her words have, now, Dr. Winters had reminded me. You are no longer that powerless child. The week before Thanksgiving, I prepared methodically. I baked an elaborate apple pie from scratch, knowing my mother would find some fault with it, but determined to bring something anyway. I chose my outfit carefully. A burgundy sweater dress that was both festive and flattering, with subtle gold jewelry that projected success without being showy. I rehearsed neutral responses to predictable provocations. When asked about my love life, I would say I am focusing on myself right now, and it feels right. When the inevitable comparisons to more settled cousins arose, I would respond, everyone has their own timeline. As I drove the 3 hours from Chicago to my parents' suburban Michigan home that Thursday morning, my confidence wavered with each passing mile. I put on empowering music, practiced deep breathing, but still felt my shoulders tensing as I exited the highway and navigated the familiar streets of my hometown. In the driveway, I sat with the engine off for several minutes, remembering past holiday disasters. The Christmas I was 16 when my mother commented on my weight throughout the entire meal until I excused myself to cry in the bathroom. The Easter I brought a boyfriend home from college only to have her interrogate him about his family income and future prospects over deviled eggs. The Thanksgiving 3 years ago when she spent 20 minutes detailing how Kyle had always been an easy baby while I had been colicky and difficult from day one. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my purse, the carefully boxed pie, and a gift bag containing an expensive bottle of wine. I am 32 years old, I whispered to myself. I am not seeking her approval anymore. With that mantra fresh in my mind, I walked up the familiar concrete path to my childhood home. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. My mother stood in the entryway, wearing a perfectly pressed apron over a camel-colored cashmere sweater, her shoulder-length, gray-blonde hair, arranged in what she called her holiday style. She looked every bit the suburban matriarch she aspired to be. "Elaine, we were beginning to think you might not make it," she said, her tone conveying both accusation and disappointment. "No hug, just a critical once-over. You look tired. The drive must have been difficult." Before I could respond, my father appeared behind her, offering the warm smile that had been my emotional lifeline growing up. "There she is," he said, stepping forward to embrace me. "So glad you made it, sweetheart." I hugged him back, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave. "Good to see you, Dad." The house was immaculate, as always decorated with tasteful Thanksgiving-themed items. Nothing excessive, but everything coordinated. The familiar scent of roasting turkey and my mother's signature sage stuffing filled the air, mingling with cinnamon from simmering potpourri. In the living room, the extended family had already assembled. Aunt Florence, my mother's older sister, waved from her perch on the window seat. Beside her sat Cousin Heather and her husband Tom, with their twin toddlers dressed in matching outfits. Uncle Frank, my father's brother, broke away from a conversation to greet me warmly. "There is my favorite niece," he said, giving me a bear hug that momentarily lifted my spirits. Uncle Frank had always seen through the family dynamics and offered subtle support. "How is the Chicago marketing mogul?" he asked, genuinely interested in my career in a way my parents never seemed to be. "The agency is doing well," I started to explain before my mother interrupted. "Elaine, you should put your pie in the kitchen. Though I already made pumpkin apple and pecan, so we might not get to it today." I felt the familiar sting but smiled. "No problem. It will keep for tomorrow." In the kitchen, I found my brother Kyle helping his wife Stephanie arrange a charcuterie board. At 29, Kyle had fulfilled all our mother's expectations, becoming a successful pediatrician, marrying a woman who gave up her teaching career to support him, and recently purchasing a home in an exclusive suburb just 20 minutes from our parents. Elaine Kyle smiled genuinely. Despite our mother's obvious favoritism, Kyle and I had maintained a decent relationship, though not as close as I wished. Great to see you. How was the drive? Not bad. Light traffic, I replied, placing my pie on the crowded counter. Stephanie offered a tight smile. Elaine loved the dress. Is that new? Her tone suggested it was a splurge I could not afford, though in reality my salary likely doubled what Kyle made as a resident. Oh, this old thing. Had it for ages, I replied casually, refusing to take the bait. My mother swooped in, fussing with dishes that were already perfectly arranged. Stephanie, that board looks wonderful. You have such an artistic touch. Must be the teacher in you. Former teacher Stephanie corrected with practiced humility. Just a stay-at-home wife now, learning to cook and decorate. And no one does it better, my mother beamed at her daughter-in-law. Kyle is so lucky. I opened the wine I had brought, pouring myself a generous glass before offering it to others. Uncle Frank accepted with a knowing wink. So Elaine, my mother began, as she checked something in the oven, still at the same company. I told Judy from my garden club that you work in advertising. Marketing strategy, actually, I corrected mildly. Yes, same firm. I was promoted to executive level last year. I mentioned it at Christmas. Oh, that is right, she said dismissively. Kyle just finished his pediatric rotation with flying colors. His attending said he has the best bedside manner with children she has ever seen. And so, it began the systematic elevation of Kyle and subtle diminishment of my achievements. I sipped my wine and reminded myself of Dr. Winter's advice. You do not need to convince her of your worth. The pre-dinner mingling continued with various small interactions that picked at my confidence. My mother mentioned how much weight I seemed to have gained since summer. Aunt Florence complimented my apartment location, only to have my mother question whether it was really a safe neighborhood. Cousin Heather asked about my love life in a tone that suggested 32 and single was practically spinsterhood. With each interaction, I felt myself slipping back into old patterns, apologizing for my life choices, minimizing my accomplishments, and seeking approval I knew would never come. The single glass of wine turned into 3 as I tried to dull the familiar pain of being found wanting. Uncle Frank cornered me by the hallway bathroom, concern evident in his kind eyes. You holding up okay, kiddo? I forced a smile. Just the usual family fun. He squeezed my shoulder. You know your mom has always been jealous of anyone who does things differently than she did. Your success reminds her of roads not taken. Before I could respond, my mother called everyone to the dining room. Dinner is served. Everyone find your place cards. I entered the formal dining room to discover I had been seated at the opposite end from Uncle Frank and beside Cousin Heather's husband Tom, who had spoken approximately 10 words to me in the 5 years since their wedding. On my other side was my mother's friend Vivian, who I barely knew. Strategic isolation, as always. As I took my assigned seat, I caught a glimpse of myself in the dining room mirror and straightened my posture, remembering my therapist's words. Your mother cannot diminish your worth unless you give her that power. With that thought, I put my napkin in my lap and prepared for the next phase of the annual emotional gauntlet. The Thanksgiving table looked like something from a home decorating magazine. Crisp white tablecloth, fine china that only emerged for special occasions, crystal glasses catching the light from the antique chandelier, and an elaborate centerpiece of autumn flowers and miniature pumpkins. My mother had always been meticulous about presentation, as if a perfect table setting could ensure a perfect family. Before we serve, my mother announced I would like to continue our tradition of sharing what we are thankful for this year. This tradition had always been an opportunity for subtle competition and passive-aggressive comments disguised as gratitude, I braced myself as my mother began. I am thankful for this beautiful family, especially for Kyle and Stephanie, who bring me such joy with their visits and calls. She paused meaningfully. And of course for Elaine making the effort to join us despite her busy schedule that keeps her away so often. There it was, the first direct hit, implying I deliberately stayed away, rather than acknowledging that Chicago was a 3-hour drive and I had a demanding career. My father went next, thankfully, keeping his comments general about health and prosperity. Then came Kyle, who spoke about his gratitude for his medical residency opportunities and supportive wife. Stephanie followed with a sugary speech about being thankful for traditional family values while glancing pointedly in my direction, the childless career woman. When my turn came, I kept it simple. I am grateful for growth this year, both professionally and personally, and for moments that bring us together, neutral, positive, and brief. My mother frowned slightly, clearly expecting more groveling appreciation for her hospitality. Well, that was succinct. As the food was passed around, conversation moved to family updates. Cousin Heather dominated initially, with stories about her twins' preschool achievements, each anecdote met with excessive enthusiasm from my mother. Speaking of children, my mother segued smoothly after the twins' discussion exhausted itself. Vivian's daughter just had her third baby. A beautiful family. Vivian, eager to join the conversation, pulled out her phone. "Look at my grandbabies! The oldest is just starting kindergarten." The phone was passed around with appropriate coos from everyone. When it reached me, I smiled at the cute photos. They look like wonderful kids. "There is nothing like grandchildren," my mother sighed, staring directly at me. "I just hope I live long enough to experience that joy myself." Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we have talked about this. Stephanie and I will start our family when the time is right." "Of course, darling." My mother patted his hand. "No pressure. You two will make such wonderful parents when you are ready." Then, as if she could not help herself, she added, "Though Elaine should probably be thinking about it more urgently, given her age." The table went momentarily quiet. I took a deliberate bite of turkey and chewed slowly before responding. "Actually, I am quite content with my life as it is. Not everyone needs the same path to fulfillment." "Of course not, dear," my mother replied with false sweetness. "Some women are simply more career-focused, though I do wonder if you will regret these choices later." Uncle Frank attempted to change the subject. "Elaine, tell us about that big marketing campaign your firm just launched. I saw something about it online." I began explaining our recent work with a major sports apparel brand, but within 30 seconds my mother interrupted. "Speaking of impressive careers, did I mention that Kyle is being considered for chief resident next year, the youngest in the program's history?" Kyle looked down at his plate. "Mom, that is not confirmed yet, and it would not be until next year." But my mother was already launching into a detailed account of Kyle's medical brilliance, effectively shutting down any discussion of my career. I caught Uncle Frank's eye, and he gave me a sympathetic headshake. As the main course continued, conversation drifted to relatives not present, neighborhood gossip, and eventually politics, which my father awkwardly tried to redirect each time it arose. I participated, minimally adding brief comments when directly addressed, but otherwise focusing on my meal and mentally rehearsing the self-affirmations Dr. Winters had suggested. I am worthy regardless of my mother's opinion. My value is not determined by comparison to others. I can choose how I respond to criticism. These mantras became increasingly necessary as my mother found ways to reference my perceived shortcomings in almost every conversation thread. When discussing holiday plans, She mentioned how some people always seemed too busy to participate in family traditions. When complimenting Stephanie's stuffing contribution, she noted that not everyone bothers to learn proper cooking skills anymore. By the time the dinner plates were being cleared, I had been criticized directly or indirectly for my appearance, career choices, love life, cooking abilities, housekeeping standards, and even my choice of dog breed. Baxter, my rescue mutt, was apparently inferior to purebred options. I volunteered to help clear the table, needing a moment away from the dining room tension. In the kitchen, I took several deep breaths while rinsing plates. "You know she is never going to change," Aunt Florence said, surprising me as she entered with a stack of dishes. "My sister has always been this way. Probably stems from how our mother treated her." "That explains it, but does not excuse it," I replied quietly, not wanting my voice to carry. Aunt Florence patted my arm. "No, it does not, but understanding it might help you take it less personally. It is her damage, not a reflection of you." Before I could respond, my mother swept into the kitchen with serving dishes. "Elaine, you are rinsing those all wrong. You will leave water spots on the good china." Aunt Florence rolled her eyes behind my mother's back, giving me courage to respond. "I think they will survive, Mom." "Well, when you have your own fine china, you can treat it however you like," she sniffed. "Though, at this rate, I wonder if you will ever have a home where you entertain properly." I bit my tongue, remembering the dinner parties I had hosted for colleagues and friends in my Chicago apartment gatherings my mother had always declined to attend because the drive was just too far. As we arranged desserts on serving platters, I reminded myself that I only needed to get through a few more hours. Then I could drive to the hotel I had booked, rather than staying in my old bedroom as expected. That small boundary, the choice to have my own space, felt like a significant victory, even though I had not yet revealed the plan to my parents. With desserts ready, we returned to the dining room where I knew the most challenging part of the evening still awaited. Something about the combination of sugar, additional alcohol, and the loosening of inhibitions after the main meal had historically made the dessert course the most emotionally treacherous part of family gatherings. I took my seat once more, summoning the last reserves of my emotional strength. Uncle Frank caught my eye from across the table and raised his water glass in a subtle toast of encouragement. I returned the gesture, grateful for the small alliance in this battlefield of cutting words and old wounds. The dessert course began with my mother's usual performance of false modesty about her baking. "The pumpkin pie is nothing special, just a family recipe I have been perfecting for 30 years, she said, despite knowing it was her signature dish that everyone praised annually. Plates of pie whipped cream, and after dinner, coffees were distributed as conversation shifted to holiday memories. Another treacherous territory where my childhood was often revised to fit my mother's preferred narrative. Remember the Thanksgiving when Elaine knocked over the gravy boat onto Grandma's tablecloth? My mother began launching into a well-worn story of my childhood clumsiness. "I was 7, Mom," I reminded her, keeping my tone light. "Accidents happen." "Of course they do," she agreed with a thin smile. "But Kyle never seemed to have those kinds of accidents." "Kyle also never helped in the kitchen," Aunt Florence pointed out reasonably. "Hard to spill things when you are watching football with the men." My mother ignored this logic. Elaine always was more awkward than most girls. I signed her up for ballet, but the teacher suggested perhaps sports might be more suitable. The familiar shame washed over me memories of being the ungraceful child struggling at dance recitals, while my mother watched with visible disappointment. I ended up captaining the high school swim team, I noted, and got a partial athletic scholarship. Yes, swimming. My mother wrinkled her nose slightly. All those early mornings ruining your hair with chlorine, but it kept your weight in check, at least for a while. I felt my cheeks flush and took a bite of pie to avoid responding immediately. Uncle Frank stepped in. Elaine was a fantastic swimmer. I remember watching her win that regional championship. Incredible discipline for a teenager. My mother waved this away. Speaking of discipline, Kyle's work ethic at medical school was remarkable. His professors still use his research paper as an example for new students. The systematic redirecting of any positive attention continued as dessert progressed. When I mentioned a charity fundraiser I had organized, my mother immediately recalled Kyle's volunteer work at a children's hospital. When Aunt Florence asked about my condo's lake view, my mother launched into praise for Kyle and Stephanie's new house. The pattern was so predictable, it would have been comical if it were not so painful. By my second slice of pie, I had mentally counted 17 redirections, 9 direct comparisons to Kyle, and 4 unsolicited comments about my appearance or lifestyle choices. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment of privacy. In the powder room, I stared at my reflection, noting the tension in my jaw and the slight tremor in my hands. I recalled Dr. Winter's advice from our last session. When you feel overwhelmed, ground yourself physically. Feel your feet on the floor. Count your breaths. Remember, you are an adult now, with choices your child self did not have. I practiced this for several minutes, then splashed cold water on my face and reapplied my lipstick. As I reached for the door handle, I heard my mother's voice in the hallway. I worry about Elaine, really I do. Still single at her age, so focused on work. It just is not natural. My hand froze on the doorknob. She seems successful and happy, came Uncle Frank's measured response. Not everyone needs the same things in life. That is just what childless women say to make themselves feel better about their choices, my mother replied dismissively. Deep down, they all regret it eventually. I waited until their voices moved away before emerging, my momentary calm shattered by this fresh evidence that my mother would never see me clearly or respect my life choices. Back at the table, the conversation had shifted to holiday plans. Stephanie was detailing their elaborate Christmas decorating scheme while my mother listened with rapt attention. We have a professional coming to hang the lights this year, Stephanie explained. Kyle thought it would be safer than him climbing around on ladders. So sensible, my mother approved. Doctors need to protect their hands. The company is doing a full display with a theme, Kyle added. Winter Wonderland or something. How lovely, my mother clasped her hands. We will have to drive by and see it. Elaine, will you be decorating your apartment for Christmas? The question seemed innocent enough, but I recognized the trap. Any answer would be wrong. Too much decoration would be trying too hard for someone living alone. Too little would demonstrate a lack of holiday spirit. Just a small tree and some lights, I answered neutrally. I suppose there is no point doing much when you live alone, she said, with exaggerated sympathy. No one to appreciate the effort. I felt something shift inside me, a small crack in the dam of patience I had built. Actually, Mom, I host a holiday party for friends every year. 20 people came last December. Friends from work, she asked, her tone suggesting these were not real relationships. Some from work, others from my volunteer program, my book club, college friends who live in Chicago now. How nice that you keep busy, she said, the dismissal clear in her voice. Though nothing compares to family, of course. I caught Uncle Frank's eye, and he gave me an encouraging nod, silently supporting my attempt to stand up for myself. As the evening progressed, I found myself making more frequent trips to the kitchen, ostensibly to help clear plates or refill coffee cups, but really to catch moments of solitude. During one such escape, Kyle followed me in. Hey, he said awkwardly, leaning against the counter. Mom is in rare form tonight. I raised an eyebrow. This is pretty standard, Kyle. He had the grace to look embarrassed. I know she compares us. I wish she would not. It is not the comparison that hurts most, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. It is that nothing I do is ever good enough on its own terms. Kyle studied his coffee cup. For what it is worth, I think what you have accomplished is incredible. That corner office with the view of the lake, your name in industry publications, that is amazing, Elaine. The acknowledgement from my brother brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thanks. That means a lot. I should say it more often, he admitted, and I should speak up when Mom gets going. Before I could respond, Stephanie appeared in the doorway. There you are, Kyle. Your mom is asking for help moving the good dessert plates down from the top shelf. Kyle gave me an apologetic look before following his wife out, his momentary alliance already dissolved by the stronger gravitational pull of my mother's needs. I remained in the kitchen longer than necessary, gathering strength for the final phase of the evening. I thought about leaving early, making an excuse about the long drive back to Chicago, but something kept me there. Some need to see this through to the end. When I returned to the dining room, my father was refilling wine glasses while my mother supervised the coffee service. The conversation had moved to family genetics and traits. Kyle has my father's medical mind, my mother was saying, and Stephanie has our family's natural grace. Their children will be beautiful and brilliant. I took my seat silently, wondering if anyone else noticed how these conversations always circled back to praise for Kyle and Stephanie, regardless of where they began. As I helped myself to a small slice of apple pie, I realized I was just going through the motions now, playing my assigned role in this family drama. I had come hoping things might be different with my new boundaries and awareness, but the dynamics remained unchanged. Only my perception and response could be different. With that realization, I felt a curious sense of calm settle over me. These patterns had persisted for 32 years. They would likely continue unchanged unless something dramatic altered the family system. And while I could not control my mother's behavior, I could control how much power I gave her words. This newfound clarity was about to be tested more severely than I could have imagined as the dessert conversation took its most toxic turn yet. Coffee cups were filled and refilled as the dessert plates were gradually emptied. The dining room had grown warmer as the evening progressed, a combination of the oven having run all day and the metabolic effect of a heavy meal. My father loosened his tie, and Uncle Frank had rolled up his shirt sleeves. Only my mother maintained her perfectly put-together appearance, not a hair out of place, despite hours of hosting. The conversation had settled into reminiscences about past family gatherings, prompted by my father mentioning how this was the 25th Thanksgiving in this house. Remember when we hosted both sides of the family that first year, he recalled. Must have been 20 people crowded around folding tables in the basement because the dining room was still being renovated. That was before Kyle was born, my mother added. Elaine was the only child then, always underfoot in the kitchen. I was 4, I pointed out, with a smile determined to maintain my composure. Yes, and already so particular about everything, my mother continued, throwing tantrums if her foods touched on the plate. This was an exaggeration, but I let it pass without comment, taking another sip of coffee instead. Aunt Florence joined in. I remember when Kyle was born. Elaine was so excited to be a big sister. She kept trying to read him stories, even though he was just a newborn. I smiled at this rare, positive memory of my childhood. I had that picture book about the duck family that I insisted on reading to him every day. You were so protective, my father added warmly, always checking on him in his crib. For a moment the conversation had taken a pleasant turn, focusing on a time when our family had felt wholesome and loving. But my mother could never let such moments last. Well, Elaine had to adjust quite a bit when Kyle came along, she said, her tone shifting to something sharper. She had been the center of attention for so long. That is normal for any firstborn, Aunt Florence said. I remember you had the same adjustment when I was born. My mother ignored her sister. It was different with Elaine. We had not exactly planned on having children so quickly after getting married. Her arrival changed all our plans. The atmosphere around the table subtly tensed. My father cleared his throat. Diane, perhaps we should start clearing the dessert plates. I am just being honest, Harold. My mother continued, her voice taking on the slightly higher pitch it did when she was building to something particularly cutting. We were still practically newlyweds when I got pregnant with Elaine. Had to cancel our European trip. Your father had to take that job with the accounting firm instead of starting his own practice. I sat very still, a strange buzzing sensation beginning in my ears. This was not entirely new information, but never had she stated it so baldly at the family table. Mom, Kyle began looking uncomfortable. Oh, Kyle was completely planned, my mother continued as if he had not spoken. We waited until we were financially ready, had the house set up with a proper nursery, did everything by the book. She took a delicate bite of pie, then delivered the final blow. Elaine was a mistake. Sometimes I wish you were never born. Our lives would have been so different. She laughed lightly, as if she had made a charming joke, and to my horror, nervous laughter rippled around parts of the table. Stephanie actually giggled. Cousin Heather smiled uncomfortably, and my father gave a strained chuckle while staring at his coffee cup. Only Uncle Frank, Aunt Florence, and Kyle remained stone-faced, looking between my mother and me with expressions of shock. The room seemed to slow down around me. I carefully set my fork down beside my half-eaten slice of pie. The tines aligned perfectly parallel to the edge of the plate. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, the pulse visible in my wrist as I placed my hands in my lap. Every childhood hurt, every criticism, every comparison suddenly crystallized into this moment. My mother had finally said explicitly what had been implied my entire life, and she had done it as casually as commenting on the weather, expecting me to accept it as I had accepted everything else. But something had changed in me. Perhaps it was the months of therapy. Perhaps it was the pure shock of hearing those words spoken aloud at the Thanksgiving table. Or perhaps it was simply that after 32 years I had finally reached my limit. I felt my lips curve into a smile, not the placating smile I usually offered to keep the peace, but something calmer and more genuine. I looked directly at my mother across the length of the table. That explains so much, I said, my voice steady and clear in the suddenly silent room. All these years I thought you were just a terrible mother, but now I understand you never wanted to be my mother at all. The words hung in the air, like crystal sharp and clear. My mother's face drained of color so rapidly, I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish suddenly pulled from water. No one at the table moved. My father stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Kyle's eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and what looked almost like admiration. Uncle Frank sat back in his chair with the hint of a satisfied smile, while Aunt Florence pressed her napkin to her mouth. Stephanie and Cousin Heather exchanged alarmed glances, while Heather's husband Tom suddenly became intensely interested in the pattern on his dessert plate. Vivian, my mother's friend, looked as though she wanted to dissolve through the floor. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was likely only seconds. I maintained eye contact with my mother, refusing to back down or qualify my statement. For once, I had named the truth that had shaped our relationship from the beginning, and I would not take it back to ease her discomfort. Finally, my father attempted to break the tension. Well, I think we could all use some more coffee. Diane, where did you put the fresh pot? But my mother remained frozen, her face, a mask of shock and something else I had rarely seen there. Vulnerability. The tension in the dining room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My father's attempt to divert attention with coffee had failed completely, as everyone remained locked in the tableau created by my words. My mother still had not spoken, her normally animated face unnaturally still. With deliberate movements, I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood up. I think I should go. Elaine, wait. Kyle started, half rising from his chair. It is okay, I assured him. I have a hotel room in town. I had planned to stay there tonight anyway. This revelation seemed to finally snap my mother out of her shock. A hotel. But your room upstairs is ready. Why would you waste money on a hotel? Her voice had a strange, brittle quality, as if she were trying to force the evening back to normalcy through sheer willpower. I think we all need some space, I said calmly. Thank you for dinner. I walked to the hallway to collect my coat and purse, my movements measured and deliberate. I could hear hushed, urgent conversation breaking out behind me in the dining room, but I did not turn back. In the entryway, I slipped on my coat and checked my phone, noticing my hands were surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Uncle Frank appeared in the hallway. I will walk you out, he said quietly. At the front door, he pulled me into a quick hug. I have been waiting 30 years for someone to call her out, he whispered. You did good, kid. Thanks, I murmured. Sorry for ruining Thanksgiving. You did not ruin anything, he assured me. Some things need to break before they can heal properly. Aunt Florence appeared behind him. Text me when you get to your hotel safely, she instructed, squeezing my arm. And call me tomorrow if you need to talk. I nodded gratefully and stepped out into the cold November air. The sky had cleared during dinner, and stars were visible above the suburban street. I walked to my car with measured steps, refusing to run like a scolded child. As I backed out of the driveway, I glanced at the house. My father stood at the living room window, his expression unreadable behind the glass. There was no sign of my mother. The drive to the hotel took only 15 minutes, but it felt like crossing a vast distance. My mind replayed the scene at the table, repeatedly analyzing every facial expression, every word. Had I overreacted? Had I been too harsh? But each time I recalled my mother's casual statement, I wish you were never born, I felt justified in my response. Instead of going directly to the hotel, I found myself pulling into a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. I needed neutral ground to process what had just happened, and the thought of sitting alone in a hotel room seemed suddenly unbearable. The diner was nearly empty on Thanksgiving night, just a few truckers at the counter and an elderly couple in a corner booth. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered coffee and a slice of pie I did not want, but felt would justify my occupation of the table. My phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. Are you okay? That was intense. Mom is upstairs lying down. Dad says she has a migraine. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Part of me felt guilty for causing disruption, the caretaker role I had been conditioned to play since childhood. Another part felt a surprising sense of relief, as if a heavy backpack I had been carrying for years had suddenly been set down. I finally replied, I am fine. At a diner having coffee, we'll call tomorrow. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before Kyle's next message came through. For what it is worth, I was shocked by what Mom said. That was beyond her usual stuff. I am sorry. This unexpected alliance brought tears to my eyes. I blinked them away as the server delivered my coffee. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked, noting my expression. "Family Thanksgiving," I explained with a weak smile. "It got a little dramatic." She nodded knowingly. "Those are the worst. Take your time here. We are open all night." As I sat sipping my coffee, more messages began arriving. Aunt Florence checking I was safe. Uncle Frank sending a simple "proud of you." Even Cousin Heather texted, though her message was typically self-centered. "That was so awkward," Tom says. "We should leave tomorrow instead of staying the weekend." Is that overreacting? My father did not contact me, which was unsurprising. Conflict avoidance was his specialty, and he would be busy managing my mother's emotional state. By the time I finished my coffee, I had received updates from Kyle about the post-departure fallout. Apparently, after I left, my mother had dramatically retreated upstairs, claiming to feel faint. The remaining guests had made awkward small talk for 30 minutes before beginning to disperse. Uncle Frank had apparently told my father Diane owes Elaine an apology, not the other way around, causing further tension. At the hotel, I went through my bedtime routine mechanically, the emotional exhaustion of the evening finally catching up with me. As I settled into bed, one final text came through from my mother. "I do not understand why you would embarrass me like that in front of everyone. Some things should remain private. I will not be speaking to you until you apologize for your behavior." I stared at the message for a long time, recognizing the familiar pattern. My mother had wounded me deeply, yet somehow I was the one expected to apologize. In the past, I would have done so, accepting responsibility for her feelings to maintain family peace. Not this time. I put the phone down without responding and turned off the light. Despite the emotional turbulence, I fell asleep quickly, as if my body recognized that something important had shifted and needed processing in the deeper realms of consciousness. Morning brought a strange mixture of regret and empowerment. I checked out of the hotel early and drove to a local coffee shop to gather my thoughts before beginning the drive back to Chicago. I had originally planned to stay in town until Saturday, perhaps meeting Kyle for lunch or visiting my one remaining local friend from high school. Now the pull to return to my own space, my own life, was overwhelming. As I sat with my latte, I drafted and deleted multiple responses to my mother's text. Everything felt either too conciliatory or too combative. In the end, I chose simplicity. "I spoke my truth after hearing yours. I am not sorry for that. I hope someday we can build a healthier relationship, but I will not pretend anymore that your words do not hurt me." I sent it before I could second-guess myself, then immediately put my phone on Do Not Disturb and started the drive home. The 3 hours on the highway gave me time to process the previous night, to feel the full range of emotions from sadness to anger to a surprising sense of liberation. By the time I reached my Chicago apartment, I felt wrung out but somehow lighter. Baxter greeted me with enthusiastic jumping and spinning, his unconditional dog love a balm to my soul. I took him for a long walk along the lakefront, the November wind off Lake Michigan clearing my head. When I finally checked my phone again, there were more messages from family members, but nothing from my mother. Kyle had sent a thoughtful text, saying he respected how I had stood up for myself and asking if we could talk soon. Uncle Frank and Aunt Florence had both called, leaving voicemails expressing support. The only response to my text to my mother was from my father using her phone. "Your mother is too upset to respond right now. We need time to process everything. Please do not contact us for a while." I sat on my couch, Baxter's head in my lap, and realized that for the first time in my adult life, I felt okay about my mother's rejection. Her silence was not a punishment, but a respite. The relationship had been broken for decades. I had simply named the fracture at last. 1 month after the Thanksgiving confrontation, I sat in Dr. Winter's office for our weekly session. The December sunlight filtered weakly through her office blinds, creating patterns on the carpet that Baxter, who now accompanied me to therapy as an emotional support animal, watched with interest. "How are you feeling about the holidays?" Dr. Winters asked, noting the date on her calendar. "Surprisingly okay," I replied honestly. "This will be my first Christmas without family obligations, and there is something freeing about it." In the weeks since Thanksgiving, the family had divided into camps. My mother maintained her silence, refusing to speak to me directly. My father served as her reluctant messenger, sending occasional stilted texts that were clearly composed under her supervision. Kyle had become an unexpected ally, calling weekly and even planning a visit to Chicago in January. Aunt Florence and Uncle Frank had been steadfast supporters, checking in regularly and validating my experience. Cousin Heather and the extended family had mostly retreated to a safe distance, uncomfortable with the disruption to the family system, but not invested enough to take sides. "Your mother's reaction is textbook narcissistic," Dr. Winters observed. "When confronted with the impact of her behavior, she has made herself the victim and you, the villain." I nodded, having come to the same conclusion. The weird thing is, I expected to feel more devastated by her cutting me off. But there is relief mixed with the sadness. "That relief is telling you something important," Dr. Winters noted. "What do you think it means?" I considered this while absently stroking Baxter's ears. "I think it means the relationship was more draining than nurturing. Having distance has shown me how much energy I spent managing her feelings and seeking approval that never came." "Exactly. And how has this realization affected other areas of your life?" This question made me smile. In the month since Thanksgiving, several positive changes had emerged in my daily life. I had started speaking up more confidently in executive meetings at work. I had ended a lukewarm dating relationship that had been lingering mainly because the man looked good on paper. I had even confronted a pushy neighbor about her habit of leaving passive-aggressive notes about hallway noise. "I am setting better boundaries everywhere," I told Dr. Winters. "It is like once I finally stood up to the person who intimidated me most, everyone else seems less frightening." As Christmas approached, invitations arrived from friends for holiday gatherings. Rather than automatically declining in favor of obligatory family visits, I accepted several, including Christmas Eve dinner with my closest Chicago friends. For Christmas Day itself, I volunteered at a local shelter, finding unexpected joy in serving meals to those without homes or families. A week before Christmas, an unexpected development occurred. Kyle called to say he was in Chicago for a medical conference and asked if we could meet for lunch. We met at a restaurant near my office, the initial awkwardness quickly giving way to the most honest conversation we had ever had as siblings. "I want to apologize," Kyle said, after we had ordered. "I have been complicit in Mom's treatment of you for years. I accepted the golden child role because it was easier than standing up to her." His acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. We were both just playing the parts we were assigned. "Maybe, but I could have been a better brother," he insisted. The things she said at Thanksgiving, that was not the first time I had heard comments like that. I should have called her out years ago. We talked for nearly 3 hours, comparing our vastly different experiences growing up in the same household. Kyle shared his own struggles with our mother's controlling nature, the suffocating expectations that came with being the favorite, the guilt he felt about his advantages. "Stephanie is exactly the daughter-in-law Mom wanted," he confided. "Sometimes I wonder if I married her, partly because I knew Mom would approve." This level of vulnerability from my brother was unprecedented, and I found myself sharing equally honest reflections about my own life choices. I moved to Chicago partly to create distance, I admitted. Every accomplishment was sweeter when I did not have to see Mom diminish it in real time. By the end of lunch, something had shifted between us. The artificial distance created by our mother's manipulation had begun to dissolve, revealing the potential for a genuine adult-sibling relationship. "I am still going to Mom and Dad's for Christmas," Kyle said as we prepared to leave. Stephanie insists. "But I want you to know I see things differently now. I am going to start pushing back when Mom tries to tear you down." His support meant more than I could express. "Thank you. That means a lot." As winter turned to spring, the separation from my mother continued. My father occasionally reached out with awkward attempts at mediation, but I remained firm in my position that I would not apologize for naming the truth. Some mutual acquaintances reported that my mother was telling a revised version of events, casting herself as the wounded party blindsided by an ungrateful daughter. This would have devastated me once, but now I recognized it as part of her inability to accept accountability. 6 months after Thanksgiving, the landscape of my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. My confidence at work led to a significant promotion. My social circle expanded as I invested more energy in authentic friendships. I even began cautiously dating someone who appreciated my directness and strength rather than finding it intimidating. Most significantly, my relationship with myself had healed. The critical inner voice that had echoed my mother's disapproval gradually quieted, replaced by a more compassionate self-regard. I still attended therapy, but our focus had shifted from trauma recovery to growth and future planning. Throughout this period, my mother attempted various strategies to regain control without offering a genuine apology. She sent birthday gifts that arrived without cards. She had my father call with transparent excuses to check on me. She recruited extended family members to apply pressure, suggesting I was breaking my mother's heart with my stubbornness. I weathered these attempts with a calm I would not have thought possible before. Dr. Winters had helped me understand that these were predictable patterns when someone loses control of a relationship they previously dominated. When Memorial Day approached, Uncle Frank called to invite me to a barbecue at his house. "Your parents will be there," he warned, "but so will a lot of other people. Neutral territory might be good for a first encounter." I considered declining but realized avoidance was its own form of giving power to the situation. "I will come," I decided, "but I am bringing a friend for support." The gathering was initially awkward but manageable. My mother maintained a cool distance, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary and in the presence of others. My father made strained attempts at normalcy. What surprised me most was how different they both looked to me now. Smaller, somehow less intimidating. By the end of summer, a new family dynamic had established itself. I maintained minimal contact with my mother, but had rebuilt a warmer relationship with my father through occasional phone calls when my mother was out. Kyle and I spoke regularly, and he had begun his own therapy journey, exploring how our upbringing had shaped his choices. 1 year after the confrontation that changed everything, I hosted a small Thanksgiving gathering in my Chicago apartment. Uncle Frank and Aunt Florence came along with Kyle, though not Stephanie, who had chosen to visit her own family. Several close friends rounded out the group, creating a blend of family and chosen family that felt more genuine than any holiday gathering I could remember. As we sat around my dining table, I realized that healing had not come from reconciliation with my mother, as I once thought it must, but from reconciliation with myself. The truth I had spoken that night had freed me from decades of seeking approval from someone constitutionally unable to give it freely. My mother and I would likely never have the relationship I had longed for as a child. That reality still brought sadness sometimes, but no longer defined me. Family, I had learned, could be found and created in many forms. The people around my table that day were there by choice, connected by mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation. As I looked around at the faces of those who truly saw and valued me, I felt profound gratitude for the painful awakening that had led to this more authentic life. Sometimes the most perfect reply to years of diminishment is simply to claim your worth and walk away from those who cannot recognize it. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with family? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the greatest healing. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through life's challenges. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve relationships that build you up, not tear you down.